My husband's business partner bet him $1,000 I'd have a breakdown when they announced my resignation at the company New Year's Gala. "She'll make a scene," he laughed over speakerphone while I stood frozen in the hallway holding my husband's dry cleaning. "Women like her always do." My husband chuckled back. "Double or nothing," she cries before dessert. That was December 27th. 4 days before the gala. 4 days before I smiled, thanked everyone for the opportunity, and handed my husband an envelope that made his lawyer resign the next morning. Before we go deeper, thank you for being here. If you believe no woman should ever be blindsided by someone who vowed to protect her, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us reach others who need strategy, not just sympathy. Now, let's continue. But this story didn't start in that hallway. It started 3 years earlier with champagne and promises in a conference room overlooking downtown Chicago. My husband, Derek, had just landed the biggest client of his career. I was the one who brought that client in, through my connections, my reputation, my 15 years in corporate consulting. When Derek proposed we merge our firms and our lives, it felt like destiny. I said yes to both. The first year was everything I imagined. We were equals, partners in every sense. My name was on the door next to his. My signature carried the same weight, but somewhere in year 2, things began to shift. So gradually I almost didn't notice. "Let me handle the Henderson account," he'd say. "You focus on the creative stuff." The creative stuff. That's what he started calling my strategic work. The same work that built half our client base. I told myself he was trying to help, that he saw something I didn't. I adjusted. I accommodated. I made myself smaller without realizing I was shrinking. By year 3, my name was still on the door, but my voice had disappeared from the boardroom. Derek spoke for both of us at client meetings. He introduced me as my wife who helps with operations. Helps? Like I was an assistant. Like I hadn't built a 7-figure consultancy before I ever met him. His business partner, Greg, made it worse. They'd laugh together at dinners about letting the wives think they're in charge. Greg's wife would smile tightly and pour more wine. I'd change the subject and pretend I didn't hear. But I heard. I always heard. "You'd be lost without me, you know," Derek said one evening, swirling his scotch while I reviewed quarterly reports at the kitchen table. "This business runs because I close deals. You just organize things." I looked up from my laptop. "I brought in 40% of our revenue last year." He smiled, the kind of smile that made me feel foolish for stating facts. "Sure, but who actually sealed those contracts?" He kissed my forehead and walked away. I sat there, cursor blinking on a spreadsheet I'd built from scratch, and felt something harden in my chest. I started paying attention after that. Really paying attention. To the way he'd cut me off mid-sentence in meetings. To how he'd take credit for my proposals and frame them as collaborative efforts he'd refined. To the small comments that landed like paper cuts, too minor to address individually but collectively bleeding me dry. "You're overthinking again," he'd say when I pushed back on a decision. "This is why I handle the big picture." The big picture. As if I couldn't see past my own nose. As if 20 years of experience meant nothing compared to his confidence. I didn't confront him. I'd tried that before, early in our marriage, and learned it only made things worse. He had a talent for turning my concerns into evidence of my emotional instability. "You're stressed. You're being paranoid. Maybe you should talk to someone about these mood swings." So I stopped talking and started watching. The affair was almost boring to discover. A text notification on his iPad while he showered. A name I didn't recognize with a string of hearts. I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. I simply screenshotted the conversation, emailed it to a private account, and set the iPad back exactly where I found it. Then I made dinner and asked about his day like nothing had happened. Over the following months, I built a quiet archive. Hotel receipts hidden in jacket pockets. Late-night client calls that went to the same number. A perfume sample in his gym bag that I'd never worn. Each discovery went into a folder on a cloud drive he didn't know existed. I labeled it Tax Documents 2019. He never looked at anything that old. But evidence of an affair wasn't enough. In our state, infidelity had limited impact on divorce settlements. What I needed was something bigger. Something that would protect everything I'd built before he could dismantle it. That's when I started reading our partnership agreement again. The one we'd signed 3 years ago in that champagne-filled conference room. Derek had drafted it himself, proud of his legal cleverness, too proud to hire an actual attorney. I'd signed it on our wedding day, caught up in the romance of merging everything. But reading it now, with clear eyes, I found something he'd missed. A clause about decision-making authority in the event of dissolution. A clause that gave whoever initiated separation proceedings first a 72-hour window to restructure asset allocation. He'd written it thinking he'd always be the one in control. He never imagined I'd use it against him. I took the document to my sister Rachel, an attorney in Boston who'd never liked Derek. She read it 3 times, then looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite name. "He handed you the keys to the castle," she said slowly. "And he doesn't even know there's a door." We spent weeks preparing. Every asset catalogued. Every shared account documented. My premarital contributions to the business calculated down to the penny. Rachel found 2 other attorneys who specialized in corporate dissolution, and together they built a strategy so airtight that Derek's future lawyers would have nothing to grab onto. I hid everything in plain sight. Legal folders in my desk drawer, labeled with boring names like vendor contracts and insurance renewals. Derek never snooped through my things. He didn't think I had anything worth finding. Meanwhile, I kept playing the role he'd written for me. I organized his calendar. I smiled at his jokes. I nodded along when he explained things I'd taught him years ago. He relaxed into my compliance, mistaking my silence for surrender. He didn't notice that I'd stopped arguing because I'd stopped needing his permission. The New Year's Gala was Derek's idea. A grand celebration of the company's best year yet, a year built largely on a client I'd personally managed while he played golf with Greg. He planned to announce a restructuring that night, a polite word for pushing me out of the company I'd helped create. They'd offer me a symbolic consulting role, a title with no power, while he and Greg took full control. I found out by accident. Derek left his laptop open while he took a call in the other room. An email from Greg with the subject line "Operation Fresh Start" sat right there on his screen. I read it in 30 seconds. They'd planned everything, the announcement, the timeline, even the talking points for concerned clients. There was a line near the bottom that made my stomach turn. "She'll be upset, but she'll accept it. She always does. She always does." 4 words that summarized how little he knew me. How little he'd ever tried to know me. I closed the laptop and went to the kitchen. I made tea. I sat in the breakfast nook and watched the snow fall outside, and I felt something settle into place. Not anger, not exactly. Something colder. Something cleaner. He wanted to announce changes at the gala? Fine. So would I. The next 4 days were the calmest of my life. I finalized everything with Rachel. I prepared documents that would file automatically at midnight on January 1st, triggering the dissolution clause before Derek even knew what hit him. I chose my dress for the gala, a deep emerald green that Derek once said made me look too serious. I had my hair done. I got a manicure. I felt like a woman preparing for battle, armor polished and sword sharpened. The night of the gala, our ballroom glittered with fairy lights and champagne flutes. 300 people filled the space, clients and colleagues and industry friends who'd watched our company grow. Derek worked the room like he owned it, which I suppose he thought he did. Greg followed behind him, laughing too loud, slapping backs, radiating the confidence of a man who'd never faced a consequence. I circulated separately, accepting compliments on my dress, making small talk about holiday plans. Several clients pulled me aside to thank me personally for my work on their accounts. I smiled and tucked their gratitude away like receipts. Evidence that my contributions weren't invisible, even if Derek pretended they were. At 10:30, Derek clinked a fork against his glass and called for attention. The room hushed. He stood at the front, Greg beside him, both wearing matching smug expressions that made my skin crawl. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Derek began, voice warm and practiced. "This year has been incredible for the firm, and we wanted to celebrate with the people who made it possible." A pause for applause. "But we also have an announcement. As we move into the new year, we're making some changes. Strategic realignments to position us for even greater growth." I watched from the middle of the crowd, sparkling water in hand, face carefully neutral. "My wife has been an incredible partner in building this company," Derek continued, and I almost laughed at the word partner. "But she's decided to step back from day-to-day operations to focus on other opportunities. We're so grateful for everything she's contributed." He gestured toward me. 300 heads turned. Someone started clapping uncertainly. Derek's smile was wide and fixed, waiting for me to play along, to nod graciously and fade into the background like I always did. I didn't nod. Instead, I walked forward, heels clicking on the marble floor. The clapping died down. Derek's smile flickered, just slightly, as I approached the microphone. "Thank you, Derek," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I appreciate the kind words. And you're right. There are going to be changes." I reached into my clutch and pulled out an envelope. Derek's eyes tracked it like it might explode. Greg shifted his weight, suddenly uncomfortable. "Effective midnight tonight," I continued. "I've initiated dissolution proceedings under Section 4.7 of our partnership agreement. The clause you wrote yourself, Derek. The one that grants the initiating party primary restructuring authority." The silence was absolute. I could hear the ice settling in someone's drink across the room. "What this means," I said, turning to address the crowd, "is that the company will continue operating smoothly under new leadership. I'll be assuming control of all client relationships I personally developed, which represents approximately 60% of our current revenue. Mr. Harrison and Mr. Mitchell are welcome to build something new with the remaining accounts." Derek's face had gone pale. "You can't do that," he managed. That clause was never meant to." "It's already filed," I said calmly. "My legal team submitted the paperwork 2 hours ago. You should be receiving notification any moment now." As if on cue, Derek's phone buzzed in his pocket. Then Greg's. Then several others around the room, attorneys and executives checking their own devices as the news rippled outward. I turned back to my husband, meeting his eyes for the first time all evening. "You bet I'd cry before dessert," I said quietly, just loud enough for him to hear. "But I don't cry over things I've already grieved." Then I pulled out a second envelope and handed it to him directly. "These are the divorce papers. I've already signed. The prenup we agreed to protects my premarital assets, and the clause about business dissolution means the company split is already determined. Your attorney can review everything, though I understand he may have questions about that partnership agreement you were so proud of." Derek stared at the envelope like he'd never seen paper before. His mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. Greg stepped forward, face red. "Now wait just a minute. This is completely inappropriate. You can't just—" Actually, a voice cut in from the side of the room. "She absolutely can." I turned to see a woman I recognized, Derek's assistant of 4 years, moving toward us. She was carrying her own folder. "I've been keeping records too," she said, not looking at Derek. "Of the client meetings he claimed to run solo that were actually handled by his wife. Of the proposals he presented as his own that came from her files. Of the revenue projections he inflated to secure his bonus while understating her contributions." She placed the folder on the nearest table. "It's all documented. With timestamps." The room erupted into murmurs. I hadn't planned this. Hadn't known Derek's assistant was watching as closely as I was. But apparently, I wasn't the only one who'd grown tired of being invisible. Derek finally found his voice. "This is insane. You're all insane. I built this company. I made it what it is." "You made it what it is?" The question came from the back of the room. Marcus Chen, our largest client, the one I'd spent 2 years cultivating. He stepped forward, arms crossed. "Because I distinctly remember choosing this firm because of a proposal your wife presented. A proposal you tried to take credit for in our last meeting. By the way, she was too polite to correct you. I wasn't sure if I should say anything." He shrugged. "Guess now I should." More voices joined in. Clients confirming they'd worked primarily with me. Colleagues remembering projects I'd led that had been rebranded as team efforts. A picture emerging of a woman who'd been systematically erased from her own success story. Derek stood in the center of it all, shrinking somehow, becoming smaller as the truth grew larger around him. Greg had already slipped toward the exit, self-preservation winning out over loyalty. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The facts spoke loudly enough. "I think we're done here," I said finally, retrieving my clutch from the table. "Happy New Year, everyone. I look forward to working with many of you in the months ahead." I walked out of the ballroom without looking back. The cold January air hit my face like a benediction, sharp and clean and exactly what I needed. Behind me, I could hear the Gala collapsing into chaos, Derek's voice rising and falling as he tried to salvage something unsalvageable. My phone buzzed. A text from Rachel, documents filed. "It's done." Congratulations, sis. I stood on the sidewalk outside the hotel, snowflakes catching in my hair, and breathed deeper than I had in years. The aftermath unfolded faster than I expected. By January 3rd, Derek's attorney had contacted mine to negotiate, but there wasn't much to negotiate. The partnership agreement was clear. The prenup was solid. The evidence of his affair, which I'd submitted as supporting documentation, eliminated any sympathy he might have garnered. Greg tried to sue for breach of something or other, but his case fell apart when Marcus Chen and 3 other major clients publicly announced they were following me to my new firm. The company Derek had been so proud of hemorrhaged talent within weeks. His assistant accepted a position with me. So did 2 junior consultants who'd apparently been waiting for permission to escape. I didn't take pleasure in his downfall, not exactly. Watching someone self-destruct is never satisfying when you remember loving them once. But I felt something close to peace, knowing that his diminishment wasn't my doing. I'd simply stopped propping him up. The collapse was entirely his own. I moved into a new apartment in February, a bright space with tall windows overlooking the lake. I painted the walls a soft gray that Derek would have called depressing and filled the shelves with books I'd never had time to read. I cooked meals for one and didn't apologize for eating in silence. I relearned the sound of my own thoughts. In March, I officially launched my consultancy. Smaller than before, more focused, entirely mine. The clients who followed me seemed relieved to work with someone who actually showed up, who remembered their names, who didn't need a translator to understand their needs. My mother visited in April, walking through my new office with tears in her eyes. I never liked him, she admitted over lunch. But you seemed happy, so I didn't say anything. I seemed happy, I repeated. That's the tricky part, isn't it? Seeming versus being. She squeezed my hand across the table. Are you being happy now? I thought about it honestly. I'm being myself, I said. That's a start. The first time I saw Derek after everything settled, it was by accident. A coffee shop in late May, both of us reaching for the same table. He looked older somehow, grayer at the temples, his confidence worn down to something rawer underneath. You didn't have to destroy everything, he said quietly. I set down my cup. I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped pretending I was less than I am. He opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, then closed it again. After a moment, he simply nodded and walked away. I watched him go and felt nothing at all, which I suppose was its own kind of closure. Last month, I had dinner with Marcus Chen and his wife. They're expecting their first child, thrilled and terrified the way all new parents are. Over dessert, Marcus mentioned that he'd heard Derek was consulting now, small projects, nothing significant. Couldn't handle being on the other side of the desk, he observed. I didn't respond. What was there to say? Some people define themselves by what they can take from others. When you stop letting them take, they don't know who they are anymore. I went home that night and stood at my window, watching the city lights shimmer on the water. My apartment was quiet. My phone was silent. My calendar for tomorrow held meetings that mattered, with people who valued what I brought to the table. I poured myself a glass of wine and thought about that moment in the hallway 3 years ago, holding Derek's dry cleaning, hearing him laugh about my inevitable breakdown. He was so sure I'd crumble. So confident that I'd accept whatever scraps he offered and be grateful for them. He didn't understand something fundamental about me. About any woman who spent years building something real while someone else took credit. We don't crumble. We calculate. We wait. We watch. And when the moment comes, we don't need drama or tears or public scenes. We just need the truth. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt underestimated by someone who should have been your partner, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was the moment Derek's own assistant handed over that folder. What was yours? Tell me in the comments. And for more stories of quiet strength and smart strategy, subscribe and tap that notification bell. You deserve to know you're not alone.